And welcome back. This is Alden Antonucci, your host with Extreme Power Hour podcast. I got my brother with me.
How's it going today?
Yeah.
It's awesome. Thanks for
And
me.
Abram Antonucci with Next Home Destination. And we left off on the last podcast talking about where the market was pre-COVID, where the market is today. And then you were kind of forecasting going into this next year where you're saying, you know what? It almost doesn't matter when you want to buy because it's better than renting.
Yeah, it's always better than renting. I'm a landlord myself, and I encourage renting. It always helps us landlords and other people who own some multifamilies keep stimulating the economy. But I'm all about people having home ownership and building wealth.
Mm.
I would love for everyone to A, get their first home, and B, get their second home as fast as they can. Start building that equity in their homes, because in the American culture, society, our biggest asset and our biggest wealth builder is our home, our single family home, condo, townhome, whatever it is. Your biggest wealth creator is real estate.
Right.
So
And
it's
so
always best to get into it as early as you can. So.
Last time we kind of left the podcast at there's a 5 million home shortage nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of doing an umbrella. People right now, it almost seems like they're flocking out of the cities and seeking more suburban cities, kind of like Bozeman and these kind of areas.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing in that change in the market, and how would you encourage or see that next 5 years look like?
Well, I can't really go past this year and my head wrap it around it, but we'll talk about that in a second. So 2024, I think, will be similar to 2023. I don't think that the home prices are going to go up that much more. I think we've kind of peaked and leveled.
So it's kind of,
at least in our area. Yeah, I think it's it's leveled out. I think 2024, as long as the interest rates stay in this like high sixes, mid sixes, I don't see any sudden changes going straight up or straight down. I think it'll be pretty consistent, especially it's an election year. So I don't think the federal government's going to monkey with things too much. We don't really want to see any spikes or drops. I think it's going to stay pretty consistent for 2024. Where people are moving in the country as a region. So in 2023, 40% of the homes, get this, were bought in the South.
40% of homes were bought in the South.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it means you're seeing a migration towards the southern states. People are
Florida and all those states.
Alabama, Tennessee, the whole southeast corner, the Sunshine States belt there. That's where we're seeing a lot of the people going to. New England was one of the slowest growths. I think it was only accounted for like 12% of the transactions. The West was really slow last year. It was only like 14%. And then there was a big flock actually to the Midwest part of the country because that's more affordable. And your producer had asked me like, well, how would you get into a home for the first time? And I've told people, it might be that you have to purchase a property in another state. Maybe not for you to even live in. And this could be like, maybe you rent in like a Bozeman, Montana, but maybe you can afford a house in, Memphis for $100,000.
Right.
You have a tenant in there. You're making some cash flow on that property, and then you can take that asset. Now go to a bank in Bozeman and be like, hey, bank, I already have a property over here. It's producing income. I've got some value in that, and then sell that to take that money as a down payment to buy in an area you want to. I mean, that could be one way to do it. Or maybe you move to a Jacksonville, Florida for 2 years, buy a house for $230,000, get a good job there for 2 years, sell that, take those proceeds, and then come to your next destination.
So this next 5 years, you're saying it's going to be a mixed bag. You might have to leapfrog a property to finally get where you're going to live, because right now, babe, you're not going to be able to afford your dream house yet, because it's you almost have to leverage too much where it wouldn't make sense. Like you said, you kind of only should afford between 25 and 30% of your salary.
Yeah. Another thing too is if we call it like crowdsourcing. If you've heard of crowdsourcing, do you know what I mean by that? You combine funds. So it might be you and a buddy that buy a house together. It used to be like you and a spouse.
Right.
But people are getting married later, or they're not married, so maybe you buy it with a partner, and you guys, house hack they call it. You live in one half, and your buddy lives in the other half, and at least now you're not throwing your rent out there. You're combining your resources.
There you go.
I see some of the technology coming. There's different apps out there that'll crowdsource or fund source your money. So you might be a pool of like 4 or 5 people you might even not even know. You get together. That's gonna be the new thing. You buy a house. Everyone gets a room. Everyone gets a bathroom. You share the kitchen.
That makes sense for a college kid, right?
College kid, bachelors, bachelorettes, whatever. You do that for 2 years. Everyone sells that house. It was their primary residence. And I say after 2 years because you can sell your house after 2 years and not pay capital gains tax on the money that you've earned. Let's say you bought a house for $100,000, 2 years, it's increased to $200,000. You sell it, you make $100,000. You will not get taxed on that gain of $100,000 if you've lived in it for at least 2 years.
Right.
And then you can take that money and roll it into the next one, and then roll it into the next one. So it might take a couple to get to where you want.
A lot of people have questions, and I know I do as well, is you got conventional loans, you got different programs out there. And what's considered residential when you jump up into commercial loans and stuff like that? What would make most sense to a college kid here in Bozeman?
Oh, absolutely. If you're a college kid, I would try and have your parents help you buy a house instead of just renting it. Maybe get on the title with them. Have your name listed on the buy sell somewhere. So when you leave college in 4 years, if you've been paying that rent, maybe you're paying some of it to your parents who are paying the loan, you can ultimately get a return on your investment instead of just taking that money and throwing it out there in the wind and letting it blow away. So
if you were a college kid and you had enough just to get into, let's say, a fourplex, because a fourplex is as large as you can buy on a conventional loan.
Yeah,
is that correct?
We've seen like upwards of like 4 families going in and buying like a fourplex or even a house for college parents. Put all their money together to buy one house for their kids to all share. And then they have guaranteed roommates all there. Everyone's paying the rent and that's paying down the mortgage.
And they're all invested.
And then they're not trashing the house, not trashing the neighborhoods or anything. And then in 4 years, they sell that house. Everyone gets a piece of the pie. They didn't have to pay money towards dorms, and they just appreciated. So I think that's a good way to go.
Because kind of what you were mentioning in the previous episodes, rent's not going down.
Rent's not going down.
Interest rates might settle down a little bit, but they're not necessarily going to tank enough to where it's going to make a huge difference.
Another thing that you can do is to purchase something maybe that you're not thinking about. It might be a mobile home. It might be a condo, which is not your dream place because you're attached. You have a wall. It might be a townhouse where you're attached. Something might be smaller, might be further out of town. Just have a 2-year mindset. You're like, can I live in this place for 2 years, not have to pay my capital gains when I sell it, and then roll it into the next one? That's great. Just baby steps.
Right.
Like I had a client today, and they wanted me to go look at a property for him. It was only a 1/4 acre in town. I was like, are you sure? Because when you called me a couple of years ago, you wanted 20 acres out in the country with farms that you could do a short-term rental on. And they've seen that maybe to get to that big step or that the final destination, they have to take little steps to get there.
Right.
And so it's not like they're settling. They're just trying to change in their mindset, having a longer forecast on what's possible instead of just the end goal in mind. How do you get there? It might be some smaller properties before they get to that.
Right. So obviously you're talking about a market that's constantly changing, almost like a river, just slowly changing, right? And there's another issue that's happening here in Bozeman, more in the local market, especially in the last couple of months. I heard Airbnb, something happened with the status of Airbnb in Bozeman proper.
Yeah, Bozeman City limits short-term rentals. You just have to be careful. They've passed some legislation now where if you're not a primary resident of that house, it's much more difficult to rent it out as a short-term rental.
In short-term rental, what's the definition?
The definition in the city of Bozeman limits is 27 days.
So if I did a contract for 28 days, technically that's fine. Anything less than that, Airbnb, I'm trying to rent that house for 3 days.
Airbnb,
what's that look like?
VRBO, they're going to, you need to get permission from the city of Bozeman. I'm not sure if it's a letter to Airbnb or VRBO. They won't even let you put it on the site unless it's compliant.
So can you still have Airbnbs in Bozeman proper? 59715.
If you're referring to short-term rentals, anything under 27 days, 28 days or less, basically, you just have to go through the city of Bozeman, and there's a whole process on how to do it. They look at what zone you're in, what the use will be. There's a whole process for it, so it's bigger than that. But basically, talk to your local real estate agent before you try and go down that road. Even if it's in the county, there's different areas where that's not allowed to. So just be cognizant of it. And also your local homeowner association. It might be fine in your city, but against your homeowner association. So just do your research first.
So even that's moving too. It's a
moving target. Yeah, I used to.
Would you recommend somebody out of state? I'm going to buy a property in Bozeman. I'm going to put it on Airbnb. What would you recommend at that point?
It takes a lot of work. First, I kind of interview the buyer if they have experience in it, and if they have backup funds. It can be really lucrative or it can be a big bust.
Because some of them, when they change that legislation, it shut some doors, correct?
Yeah, we sold a house a couple of years ago in Livingston in a nice new neighborhood, and we ended up being their listing agent because their buyer's agent had failed to tell them when they bought this brand new construction that short-term rental was not allowed in their neighborhood. So they set up shop, spent over $20,000 in furnishings.
Oh my!
Put it on the market, finished the landscaping, made it look beautiful, had a fully rented calendar because it's near Yellowstone National Park, only to get a letter a couple weeks later.
Is this Livingston or Immigrant?
Livingston, Montana.
Oh, wow.
Only to get a letter a couple weeks later from the attorney for the homeowner association saying cease and desist.
Oh, that's
so they
painful.
had just spent thousands of dollars, purchased a house. They live out of state and weren't planning on moving into this place for a couple of years. So their only alternative was to rent it, which the normal long-term rent wouldn't cover their...
Over 30 days.
Yeah, it wouldn't cover their mortgage. So they were forced to sell it. So we came in there as listing agents. Fortunately, it was already staged because it had nice furniture.
Brand new.
That made it easy. But they had to cancel all those reservations. And luckily, they had bought the home early enough, I think, in construction, so that when we had sold it, I think the new buyers bought some of the furniture. I think it evened out.
Right.
But they had to cancel all those reservations. The neighbors were up in arms because they were there. They were just so mad at them that they had a short-term rental in the middle of a nice neighborhood. But the city had no rules against short-term rentals. So when they looked at the rules, they thought they were fine. And even when they looked at the covenants, it wasn't well explained because short-term rentals are still a new thing. Not every HOA has ever addressed that. Back in the 2000s, 1980s, and 90s. It wasn't a thing.
Right.
But they got them under no commercial use.
Got it.
And so that's considered commercial use because they're not living
anything
there.
less than 27 or 30
Yeah,
days
they're not.
So.
They're using their home to make money, not as a primary residence. So that's really got a cease and desist.
Getting sticky.
It's getting sticky. You just got to do your homework.
Maybe that was one of the driving forces in 2022, kind of where we saw that.
Absolutely.
That $1 million peak. People were buying homes, leveraging everything so they could rent it to pay the mortgage and then some.
Because people were living in them, coming from San Francisco to live in a house for a couple months, so they could work remotely. So Airbnb, short-term rentals were all full. And then once that demand went away, so then the demand for short-term rentals and the city laws got caught up, and so
Airbnb, we're seeing it do this and kind of calm down right now, or do you think it's going to keep going down and regulations getting tighter and tighter?
I think that the new regulations will grow to include short-term rentals because it's needed. It's a needed resource in our communities. If we have, I'll take for example the Spartan race is coming to Bozeman.
June 1st and 2nd.
June 2nd in Montana. We don't have enough hotel capacity for everyone here.
15,000 people.
15,000 people are going to come to a town. Where do you put them if you don't have short-term rentals or
graduation?
On a graduation weekend. So they have their use. So I mean, in my opinion, I don't think we should eliminate them entirely. I do think that they should be regulations so that whole neighborhoods don't turn into one short-term rental. I think it's just going to be wise use and stewards of the zoning rules. So.
Well, great. That's awesome information. I appreciate you coming down here.
Thanks for having
me. And have another episode about people that are looking at this forecast, this 5-year market. We talked about Airbnb.
Yeah.
That, you know what, if you're buying a house for strictly Airbnb, probably not the best idea unless you do your homework first. And know what you're getting into.
Yep.
And I definitely have that little extra cash, just like you mentioned about somebody in Livingston that ended up buying a home but ended up selling it just barely breaking even because they didn't do all their homework and due diligence. So, well, Alden Antonucci with Extreme Power Hour with Abram Antonucci from Next Home Destination.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Stay tuned for the next one.